Veganism. I'm not a vegan, but I will say I do know a lot of people who are vegan, and it generally has health benefits for those people. I mean, those people look pretty in shape. They look pretty in shape. I remember when I was in Cleveland, I remember I stumbled accidentally from the static. No. So someone's explaining with a super chat. They're explaining, I'll just read it out. They're explaining negation of the negation. From a static perspective, negation of the negation is its opposite, but dynamically it dialects. It is the synthesis of the thesis via its antithesis. All righty. Vegan, I remember I accidentally stumbled on a protest by a group of vegans that were protesting the main Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in Cleveland. And they were naked. They were naked vegans. That was how they were doing the protest. Caleb, maybe you didn't see, but you missed Austin's cues. I wrote down a number of people's questions. It was a little repetitive, and I wrote them down. Veganism, these were young folks that were like naked, protesting against Kentucky Fried Chicken. I talked to them. I was not naked. I was wearing my own clothes, but they were trying to draw attention to their protest around Kentucky Fried Chicken. But I talked to them, and, they really had a sense that something was evil about the country and that there were bad things going on. They were very morally opposed to factory farms and the greed of agribusiness corporations, and they had a great deal of empathy for animals. And it seemed like there was a gut level knowledge that like something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And that seems to be what underlies a lot of veganism, a lot of PETA kind of activism, is that there is a gut level knowledge that something is deeply wrong with society, and there is a level of empathy and sympathy, and that sympathy is placed on animals, but there's an understanding that we are not a caring society, that we in the United States, there's a kind of a cruelty and a sadism in U.S. culture that is deeply disturbing. And I think it's a gut level sense, but I can respect that. And you get these kind of movements, right? In ancient Rome, you had such movements. They weren't vegan movements necessarily, but you had Romans who realized something was very, very evil about Rome, but they couldn't really put their finger on it. But they expressed themselves, as Stoics, trying to have more empathy, trying to find spiritual enlightenment. I think you have this, right? This is a trend that exists. When people see that their society is engaged in kind of cruelty and indifference, when people see, kind of mistreatment going on, and they feel a kind of empathy that they feel is missing from the society, that almost people's ability to be human has been kind of taken out of them in some ways in U.S. society. There is a cold, calculated individualism where people don't feel like they're part of a family or part of a community. They don't feel like they're part of a national project to build things up. They feel like, the U.S. society, there's a cruelty, there's an indifference to other people's suffering, and that flows all through U.S. society. These British Empire ideals, right? The British Empire. In my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I actually talk about what I call the Atlanticist pathology. And I talk about at the time that Britain was transitioning toward being an imperialist global power. The British culture changed a great deal. And there were a huge amount of changes in British culture. And one of those changes was that parents in Britain were told not to hug their children. That if you hug your child will become soft. Right? That if you give your child affection, this will make them weaker, right? This happened all throughout British society. There was a feeling that you should not hug your children. That's horrific. That is absolutely horrific, right? Meanwhile, there became a huge emphasis on punishment and ceremonial punishment. In British public schools, they had the caning tradition, right? Caning students on their buttocks, right? And it was, it's almost demented, right? These headmasters are importing, rattan is a very, very, it's a very rare, plant. It's not something that grows on, in Britain and places like that. And they're importing these special, rattan canes from Asia because it's very light but very heavy, and you can strike somebody on, and strike someone on their buttocks and leave, marks, and it's kind of demented the culture that kind of emerges as Britain is becoming an imperial power, right? And the theory in Britain, there's the writing on geopolitics. The first writing on geopolitics, there's a book that actually talked about how to rule the world. Britain would rule the world by having the biggest navy, right? And if you can control the trade routes, you can dominate the world. And that was a big part of British Empire ideology, that we can control the trade routes and we can dominate the world. And it's actually very similar to what was believed by the Romans, right? We've heard the expression, all roads lead to Rome. So, the idea is to build an empire or build a civilization. It's not about building things. It's not about building apparatus. It's about maintaining like an army of super soldiers, of like callous, cruel people that are super soldiers that will go around, making sure no one else controls the trade routes and everyone has to go through them. I wrote that down a long time ago, Sean. That's what they, that's kind of the idea behind the Atlanticist school of thought. And it's quite interesting that it's in Britain in 1888 that you had the world's first serial killer. You had the first serial killer in Britain. Jack the Ripper, he was called, was this man, and we still to this day don't know who he was, who would hire prostitutes and cut them into pieces. And it was in Whitechapel in the East End of London, one of the very poor sections of London, where prostitution was very, very common. And this wealthy man, and some people think he was even a doctor or a surgeon based on what he did, would hire prostitutes and just cut them into pieces. And clearly this individual, Jack the Ripper, was getting sexual pleasure out of what he was doing. He somehow enjoyed killing these women. So when, in the news, in Britain, they're publishing in all the newspapers, if anyone knows anything about who Jack the Ripper is, and they nickname him Jack the Ripper in the newspaper, if anyone knows who he is, immediately the Times of London received thousands and thousands and thousands of letters from individuals in London claiming to be Jack the Ripper. Okay? And all these people, anonymously sent the Times of London these like letters claiming that they were Jack the Ripper and describing the murders of Jack the Ripper in great detail. Right, and clearly these people that were sending these letters, they were sexually aroused by what they were doing. It was like, and they kind of admired Jack the Ripper on some level, and they were titillated. The Times of London receives thousands and thousands and thousands of anonymous letters from people claiming that they're this ugly, brutal mass murderer. So it's like something is not right here. So then the icing on the cake is that Jack the Ripper, right? He's, seeing that thousands of people are taking credit for his crimes, whoever he was. To prove that he's the actual Jack the Ripper, he sent the infamous From Hell letter, which was a package, basically, that contained some of the body parts of the people he murdered, because he wanted to be clear that he was the actual Jack the Ripper. He didn't give away his location. I didn't miss the question. And he didn't give away his location, but he actually sent, the infamous From Hell letter, to prove who he was. And this showed that as Britain was culturally transitioning toward a society that was very much trying to breed people to be super soldiers, right? That's really what they were trying to do. They're trying to build up a navy and a military that control the global trade routes. They're telling parents not to hug their children. They're developing a cultural fixation on corporal punishment and caning. And the sexual repression was a very big part of Britain in that time. Huge effort to urge people like not to masturbate and things like that. that as, the Victorian culture of sexual repression, corporal punishment, lack of parental affection, as that's all kind of cultivating, the result was you got a lot of very, very, very demented and crazy people. And out of that society, you got the first serial killer. And after Jack the Ripper, you got serial killers all throughout the Western world, in America and Britain, and in Sweden, and in France, and in places like that, in Western capitalist societies that were kind of following the British model. You got serial killers. And these were men who murdered women in horrific ways and got some kind of sexual pleasure from it. And it was awful. And in the developing world, they had never heard of this. The first serial killer in the Soviet Union was in the 1980s. And when it happened in the Soviet Union, people were like, wait, this doesn't happen. Like, this had never happened before. Around the world, people had never seen this kind of crime. It was a certain kind of demented insanity. And then what's quite interesting is around the time of the early 2000s, serial killers stopped. We don't have serial killers now. I mean, that happens rarely now, but not much. I mean, the rate of serial killers has dropped very, very significantly, and criminologists have noted this. We don't have them anymore, right? It started in like the late 1800s, and it just kind of recently came to a stop. We have mass shooters, that we have, right? We have murderers. We have people who murder people in the course of committing crime to steal their money or whatever. We have people who get angry at somebody and murder them. We have mass shooters, the crazy, guy who, usually he's on the internet and is reading about white supremacism and then takes a gun to his school and shoots everybody. We have plenty of murderers in the West, but that particular kind of murderer, the serial killer, we don't have that anymore. Doesn't happen. Why? Why? That is a question. And I mean, we don't really know when it gets down to it. There are different theories about why it is. Now, some people have argued that it's medications, right? That, the guy is, he's young and he starts talking like a serial killer, and his parents and his teachers say something's wrong with this guy, and they put him on medications. That may be part of it, right? It may be that, this young guy or whatever, he's talking like he's going to be a serial killer. He creeps everybody out, and they give him psych meds, and so he just becomes someone on psych meds for the rest of his life. That's one theory. Another theory that people point out is they say the accessibility of pornography and the lifting of sexual repression, right? That these serial killers, these were people that had sexual desires they were not okay with, and now there's porno everywhere, and porno's on the internet, and they just do whatever they would do through pornography. That's one theory, and it kind of goes against what the feminist movement in the 70s said. In the 70s, the feminist movement said that pornography caused these serial killers. Well, there's plenty of pornography now, but the serial killer thing has kind of gone to an end. So is that what it is? Another theory, the Freudian theory about why serial killers don't exist anymore, actually interesting, is that it's Viagra. Viagra, right? That what's going on is that these are men with erectile dysfunction. That these are men who they get with a woman and they have erectile dysfunction, and it causes them a huge amount of shame. And so because of that, they hate women and they can't be sexual with women, so they just murder them, right? And that they feel women are shaming them or something like that. And so now these guys, they take Viagra, they have a girlfriend, and they don't go crazy. That's another theory. There are many theories about why it is. Is it medications? Is it all the things I just listed? We don't really know, and criminologists will debate it. But there are many articles about the fact that serial killers are no longer a thing. I mean, they happen very, very rarely, but they're not a thing anymore. The Jack the Ripper stuff, something has changed. Something has changed in our culture and our society that we don't produce that kind of crazy and evil anymore. We do produce other kinds of crazy and evil, like mass shooters, right? That didn't used to happen, right? I mean, people never had seen such a thing, but now that happens. So can we expect from the administration's goal toward Africa? So it's an interesting theory in sociology. Something about British culture, and I believe that British culture's attempt to breed people as super soldiers, that particularly Spartan British culture that emerged in the 1800s in the Victorian era in Britain that was centered on sexual repression, ritualized punishment, lack of proper affection, that probably created the serial killer phenomenon. That's my belief. But what ended it? I don't really know. That I really don't know. I really don't know what ended it. I think it's an interesting thing to think about, sociologically speaking. What can we expect from Africa? Africa, Biden. All right. So there you go. I don't know how we got on that from veganism, but I think that, there is something cold and ruggedly individualist about our society, and that people that become vegans, often it is based on a sense of understanding that. You can compare it to Roman Stoicism, but there you go.